Welcome to the Simulation for Healthcare channel. I'm Jo, your host. This is the second video in the series where I talk to people who I believe have impacted on the simulation world. Martin Bromiley's wife, Elaine, died in 2005 during a routine operation. Since her death, Martin has told her story around the world in an attempt to allow us to learn the lessons about the importance of considering the part that human factors play in emergency situations. Martin, his family, and the healthcare staff involved should be commended for their courage to share so we can learn. If you haven't already seen the video, Just a Routine Operation, you may want to view this first before watching the conversation with Martin. You can find the video in a link in the video description. If you have any questions or would like to suggest something you want to see in the future, leave a comment below. If you enjoyed watching, then please like, share and subscribe to my channel. Thank you. Good morning, my name is Jo Lawrence. I'm Managing Director of Back to Life Simulation Company. I'm also a postgraduate lecturer down at Brighton and Sussex Medical School, where I run a PGCert in simulation. With me today is Martin Bromiley, who many of you will know from his national and international work in human factors. Good morning, Martin. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Jo. It's a pleasure.
Martin, I wonder if we can start by you telling us about yourself and how you became involved in human factors.
Well, the story goes back to 2005. My then wife Elaine had some healthcare problems, some health problems. She went into hospital for a planned operation on the 29th of March 2005. When she went in, she was anaesthetised, but some problems occurred. Sadly, the operation had to be abandoned, and they basically transferred her to the intensive care unit, where she remained in a coma until she passed away 13 days later. Now, during that time, I didn't really understand what was happening. I had two young children to bring up, but as things progressed, I kind of thought there might be a review into Elaine's care, not because anything had been done that was wrong as far as I knew, but just because that was normal, because my background is that I'm an airline pilot. And to me, investigation would have been a normal thing to have done, just to understand, to see if you could learn, not to blame anybody. And in the end, in fact, I did get an independent review of Elaine's care. And what we know is that when Elaine was anaesthetised, problems occurred almost straight away. They were struggling to get oxygen to her lungs. And over the course of 20 to 25 minutes, a team of clinicians, of 3 doctors, of 2 operating department practitioners, of 2 recovery nurses, had all been in theatre, and in essence the 3 doctors had fixated on the idea of intubating Elaine as a way of solving the problem. What had happened, though, was that the team of ODPs and nursing staff around, who were literally and figuratively standing back, could actually see much better what was happening, that this was deteriorating rapidly into a can't intubate, can't ventilate scenario, which is a recognised emergency in anaesthesia for which guidelines existed. That it required some form probably of surgical access to the airway, and over the course of that time they tried to, if you like, hint and tip that this is what needed to happen, but were unable to get their message across. And when I saw the results of the independent review, and when I went through the inquest a few months later, and I was able to ask some more pertinent questions, what we could establish is that there had been issues here around leadership, around decision making, around what we call situational awareness, the understanding of the big picture, around team working, communication, and all these sorts of factors. And in my world, in aviation, we know that human factors cause at least 75% of accidents. And what we had here was some issues around human factors in the widest sense. So this was about the design of some of the equipment. It was about the behaviours, and what we call non-technical skills or non-technical behaviours were a significant player in Elaine's death. And basically since 2005, I've tried to promote an understanding of human factors in healthcare.
Gosh. Well, I know you shared that story many times to help further people's understanding of human factors. So thank you for recounting that very personal experience again. We're very grateful for that. I suppose what I'm curious about now, Martin, is it's now 15 years on since Elaine's death. And what do you think has changed in that time?
So I think it's important just to take a moment to think about what things were like at that time. That I started to investigate a little bit about healthcare. I started to talk to doctors and nurses and policymakers and academics. What I was very keen about, though, is that the staff involved in Elaine's care and sadly involved in the attempted operation which led to her death weren't blamed for it. I think that the problem is that what I wanted, like most people in my situation, is I just wanted people to learn from what had happened. And so I felt the best place for that to happen was with those clinicians returning to work. And I do know now that they all eventually returned to work. Sadly, one passed away not too long after Elaine's operation. But for me, that was the best thing to happen, because if you want to make something better, you need to start spreading the learning. Now, the other thing that happened, which was important, was after a couple of years, a small group of NHS folks sat with me and we made a short film called Just a Routine Operation. You can find it on YouTube. And the purpose of doing that was just to spread the lessons from Elaine's death. Now, at the time, it was quite an insignificant moment for me. But what we do know now is from the cost of the investigation, from the cost of making that film, the total cost was around £20,000, I think. What we now know is there's been some significant changes. I think, first of all, the biggest thing that's happened is there's been there's much greater awareness now of human factors in healthcare. There's an awareness that, yes, people make mistakes at work, they make errors, but usually we can find a reason for that within the system. And if you change the system, not the people, that you can have a much greater impact on the whole delivery of healthcare. Specifically, I can say that some of the things that have happened, for example, there's now much greater talk of non-technical skills. There is human factors training that occurs at undergraduate, graduate level throughout often the medical education process, not just for doctors, but we see it for nurses, we see it for allied health professionals as well. And in fact, now in England, there is a patient safety syllabus being developed by the NHS, which includes a large part of it on human factors. So that will become common teaching across 1.3 million people in the NHS. We've seen the Healthcare Safety Investigation branch created. Has been one of the results of the work, although I should say there's lots of people being involved in that. The important thing about that is it brings a very skilled group of investigators who can help draw the learning out of situations in a way that's much better than could have been 15 years ago. In your field around simulation, we see a lot more use of simulation now, not just for teaching the very technical, the clinical skills, but for teaching the whole team working, the non-technical behaviours as well. We're starting to see examinations now in the topic in some medical schools, which is a good start. We're starting to see the idea of just culture becoming much more prevalent in healthcare. And certainly that's a message that I've taken to the very top of the NHS and to political levels as well, because I think it's important if people in healthcare want to learn from things that they have this just culture to support them. And I think the other thing that's also changed is in the workforce itself, we see a much greater level of systems thinking. And we can, a real example of that I can give you is if you go back to Dr. Baragaba case, a very tragic case, which I never comment on publicly about whether the conviction and whether the GMC ruling was right or wrong. But I think what we saw around the time that happened was there was a real outpouring of frustration, particularly from the medical community, less so from the nursing community, about all the things that may have impacted on that tragic case, the working hours, the supervision, all those sorts of things. And what that demonstrated was a much greater capacity for the community in healthcare to be able to think about the system and the impact it has on behaviour. So all those things I think we're starting to see now, and there's been many people involved in this, not just me. But it goes to show, I suppose, that from one death, from £20,000 of work, that maybe there is some good that can come from learning properly, as opposed to kind of just forgetting about it.
Thank you. I used your film from the very moment it came out and have used it for the past 15 years. And I think I can echo your thoughts. There has been a culture shift. I've been in education for that amount of time, and there is always a shift towards more about human factors and that culture of not wanting to blame, and that can only be a good thing. So thank you for that. Martin, it has been a real privilege to chat with you this morning, and most enlightening, and thank you so much for sharing both your experience and your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.